Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Tuesday Night Live, brought to you by CrowCast. Of course, another big week in Adelaide Football Club world, and lots to talk about. And joining me, as usual, is Peter J. How you going, Pete?
Good, mate. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Donkey, how are you?
Yeah, good to be with you and your listeners tonight, Phoenix.
And nice to have Macca again with us tonight after last week's revelation. I hope Mrs. Macca has been supporting you, mate, and glad to see you on deck.
And I've got the best missus in the world. She really looks after me.
Oh, wow. That's getting big.
Fiend, that was can I just say that was a fabulous bit of timing, because I'd actually disconnected myself and I was madly scrambling to get myself back online. And just as it came on, you said the words, Peter, and so I was able to just say, like nothing had happened, I was able to say, yeah, good, mate. Yeah, here you go.
You know we run a professional organisation.
We very much do. We very much do.
All right, well, there's stacks to talk about, so why don't we hook straight into it with a bit of news, eh? Well,
where do we even start? I mean, I think let's start on a positive. Great to see the club champion award through the week, and certainly a very, very deserved winner in Rory Laird. He had a fabulous season. He was absolutely terrific. I should also just mention, I thought that Josh Jenkins coming up into third was a really well deserved finish for him, much maligned, and had a really good season. But I couldn't help thinking, Fane, that in a premiership year that wouldn't have been the same top 10 as what we had. There'd be a few changes, I reckon.
Yeah, I reckon you're probably right. I mean, the BNF was probably indicative of the season that we had and the people that stood up and the people that couldn't get on the park. So unfortunate, but I do agree with you on Jenkins. I thought he was actually a bit stiff to miss out on All-Australian squad selection, to be honest with you. And, as we've mentioned throughout the year, and certainly in the latter part of the year, he's really stepped up and addressed parts of his game that we were critical of. So just reward for him. And also, of course, probably a bit stiff. Tom did a bit stiff, I reckon, but inevitable.
On the Rising Star?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought he was stiff. I thought he had we all know he had a fantastic season. Just difficult. They were, Stevenson was certainly a worthy winner, and just a difficult year to crack the award, unfortunately, when you had so much competition. Witherden took quite a few votes as well, and he had a terrific year as well. So those three players were, really outstanding.
Yeah, couldn't argue with it all there, Pete. And, I think any of them would have been... and you got me all confused now. What I was going to say, no, any one of those three were worthy winners, and I think in any other year, our bloke would have won it, because it's very difficult to come in and replace a leaver who was, in the end, was traded for 2 first-round draft picks and take his role on and do better than the guy that he replaced.
Yeah.
Before he did make the 22 under 22, which was a really good achievement for him, and probably, I think, Stiffy, he was 5th in the BNF, I think, right till about the last game, wasn't he, or second last game or something or other. And
yeah, something.
I think it was Greenwood just took him over. It was and it was only a 1 vote the difference, so he was probably stiff to be pushed out there. So no, fantastic season.
That's all the good stuff. What else?
Well, at risk of turning the whole episode into a Collective Minds episode, we can't ignore the fact that there was obviously quite a lot of news floating around in relation to that. And the biggest bomb of all, of course, was probably Friday afternoon's release of the article from Caroline Wilson, which sent the airwaves into meltdown, and a whole lot of allegations there and a whole lot of issues that remain unanswered. And certainly, as is fairly predictable, the club didn't engage and didn't really come out and clarify. To my knowledge, someone else might have picked something up, but I certainly didn't hear anything across the weekend that refuted any of that stuff. So where do you even start with that, really?
Well, you raise an excellent point there, Pete, because of when people make allegations against you, whether they're true or not, if you don't answer them, people assume they're true. And that's where Burton, in his brilliant style, messed the whole bloody thing up. Dickhead, I'll just say it again because he is one. But he made a nice mess of that press conference, as we all know. He could have actually, if he'd done a decent job then, virtually put the whole thing virtually to bed. Because he avoided the whole thing and made mockery of the reporters as well, and of course everybody offside. But you're talking about Friday night, I think it was either Thursday or Friday, Mark Williams also made the statement about players being tied naked to trees, and nobody's come out and refuted that as well. And it's probably bullshit, but the whole point is until somebody refutes it, it's assumed to be true.
Donkey, what do you reckon? You're Mr. Optimist.
Sorry, I just had an attack of little donkeys. But I tend to think that where there's smoke, there's fire a bit on this. And the fact that we haven't really come out and rebuffed a lot of the stuff, the fact that it's still bleeding on, the fact that Mitch McGovern actually walked away, the fact that Curly Hampton's season was a bit weird, and then he got dizzy and couldn't play anymore. I just think there's just a little too much going on for it to be a nothing to see here type of moment. I do think that it was a massive dog's act to drop it, at 5 hours before a club's BNF. And I think that we've clearly upset the media to a point where they are just trying to tear absolutely every shred off us as possible. So I think we're somewhere in between a complete catastrophe and being able to put together a decent 2019. I saw Pikey's speech and I was actually I thought it was pretty good. So I don't think it's game over and everything's bad, but I just think the club has mismanaged this situation and the injuries to a point where it's just it's a complete farce. I back the 22 blokes on the field every week, but the guys backing them up are atrocious.
Yeah, I'm probably of a like mind, Donkey, I think. There's a couple of things that really stick out for me. All season, we were told and others in the media were told that the Crows had done their due diligence on the camp and on collective minds. And then we had Wayne Carey come out on Monday night on Talking Footy, and hence the name of the cast tonight. And it was pretty obvious that he was acting as an unofficial spokesperson on behalf of, maybe Mike Rasciuto, or maybe Brett Burton, or a combination of the two. But he's come out and said, well, Burton didn't know anything about it and Fagan didn't know anything about it, and the club themselves have tried to spread the responsibility over the last week or so. Now, on the one hand, all season you've had the club say, well, we did our due diligence and it got signed off at all levels and it went through our integrity unit and all the rest of it. And then lately they've been saying, well, some key people didn't actually know much detail about it. Now, which is it? You can't have it both ways. And to me, the rhetoric over the last week or so, and certainly capped off by Wayne Carey's comments last night, seemed to indicate that the club are trying to control the damage, protect a couple of key personnel, and time will tell, I guess, as to whether that's successful or not, because I don't know whether the media are actually going to lie down over Brett Burton's involvement in this, and to a lesser degree Andrew Fagan.
Well, it raises a good point, Fina. What I genuinely can't understand is that what did they think that Caroline Wilson was going to do back in whenever it was she first released her article on this, which I think it was probably back in March or April, and they and she had a source at that point, and they've stonewalled her, and instead of trying to get ahead of the message and perhaps work with her and trying to limit the damage in a sensible way, they have gone to ground, they have duck shoved, and they've done a whole lot of about faces and that ridiculous press conference, that bizarre and ridiculous press conference with Pike and Burton in the middle of the year. And, clearly, someone of her standing in the AFL, in the press, wasn't just going to go away. She wasn't going to just cop that. And all that's happened now is that she's dug further, and the place is obviously leaking like a sieve because, that article that she released on Friday was quite obviously well sourced. The place is leaking like a sieve. She's gone, harder and harder and harder. And instead of trying to actually, get ahead of the message and manage it, they've just, they've kept their head in the sand and supporters are none the wiser of, really of what happened, other than the fact that, we know that they cancelled the contract. We know that there's been apologies now, of late, particularly Don Pike at the BNF. There's been acknowledgement. And so we know that something's gone wrong. We know that something was bad at that particular camp. But there is this sort of oblique, reference of, we might have pushed it a bit too far, and they want to, they don't want to release any details, and so it's just been a schmozzle. And I think that, and I said this way back in June, Fane, when we did that big couple of episodes. And I've felt all the way along that part of the problem, part of the disconnect, is that the club has refused to publicly acknowledge the players' concern over this, and that is where the disconnect is. That the players have wanted some acknowledgement of how they were feeling about it, and how it affected them. And I thought that the press conference mid-year was a really, really poor attempt to try and give them that acknowledgement, and hope that they, because if you remember, that was just after we'd had that appalling 3 or 4 weeks.
Yep.
And just after that, then because we went 6-3 at the start, 6-3 at the finish, and we blew 4 in the middle, and they were horrible performances. Excuse me, and there's clearly disconnect between the players and the club, and a lot of that is to do with the fact, in my opinion, I don't know this for a fact, but my opinion is a lot of it is to do with the fact they have not been prepared to acknowledge the damage that camp did to certain players.
Well, do you think that lack of acknowledgement might be a product of perhaps some friction or disconnect, not only from the footy department, admin and exec towards the players, but also within that department itself?
Oh, absolutely, and I'm sure it's a source of disconnect between certain factions of the playing group as well, because it's always been the case that certain players were happy with the camp.
Sorry, go on, Mac.
I was just going to say, are you referring to, say, like Pikey not agreeing with what's been done and said? Because he certainly didn't agree with what Burton was saying at that alleged explanation to everybody.
Well, we had Rob Chapman come out on Club Championship night and basically not want to talk about it anymore, and made some fairly broad brush statements regarding mistakes, and then proceeded to say that by and large we had the right people in the right spots and all the rest of it, but was very short and very succinct in saying that he didn't want to address anything anymore and that it was time to move on. And yet then we had Don Pike in his speech make what I thought was a pretty genuine effort to acknowledge mistakes, and to acknowledge that they'd got things wrong, and to me, I think we hinted at the disharmony that seemed apparent between Burton and Pike during the mid-season break when they had that silly press conference. But to me, it smacks of an ongoing disconnect between certain sections of the footy department, and I think that from what I've heard from a couple of people, there's a solid chance that there are parts of the club that are very concerned about the corporate side, the revenue streams, the building the club, and that's fine. That's partly what they're employed for. But I don't think that they're necessarily in tune with those people that are primarily concerned with winning premierships. I think at the moment the club might be suffering a little bit of an identity crisis, or certainly a directional crisis in terms of what it really stands for, and what they're all there to try and achieve.
Well, you've got the other problem too, is that I think that in any other football club that didn't have somebody as powerful as Risciuto in it, that the Brett Burton would be sacked. I have no doubt that in a properly run football club where their people aren't being sponsored, if you like, into their position by being a mate, then Brett Burton would go. But the problem, and one of the reasons why Brett Burton won't go, is because he's Risciuto's mate. And that's just not a good enough reason to have a person in that position when they've already caused a lot of the problems, and then exacerbated the whole thing when they had a press conference when they explained nothing.
Or do you think it might be even more correct to say, Macca, that had Risciuto not been on the board, then we wouldn't be talking about this because Brett Burton wouldn't have been employed in the first place?
Well, that's 100% what I am saying. So, we thought it was going to be a massive asset to have Roo there, but if this is an example of what the club's going to experience because of Risciuto being there, I'd rather he just F off and get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly stepped in at a time and he appeared to be the kind of bloke that just wanted the footy club to be successful. But I've said for a long time that I feel that the culture is very, very strong at the Adelaide Footy Club, and I've seen changes in Risciuto's demeanour. I've seen changes in Andrew Fagan's demeanour with regards to their direction and their purpose and just the way that they speak, what they find important and what they're passionate about. Andrew's very passionate about building the membership base and expanding the base of the club, and that's fine. That's part of his role. But as I said, I don't know whether perhaps there is enough credence paid to those such as the coaching staff or the strength and conditioning staff when it comes to actually doing what Andrew initially said he was going to do, which was to build the best football department in Australian football. I think Andrew's moved away from that. And I think that's where the disconnect currently might sit within the club.
I thought, Don, what you were saying before about some of the indicators coming out of the club with, people, players leaving, and I thought one of the really big stories from through the week was the Josh Franco situation, which seemed really, really curious to me that, he comes in and he transfers from, such a professional club like Sydney, and he is signed a contract for 3 years, returning home to Adelaide. Then after 1 year with the football club, he's gone. And it was certainly mentioned in Wilson's article on Friday that he was concerned and had written to the club about his concern regarding the camp. And I think these are all as you say, where there's smoke, there's fire. And these are all the sort of the little things, the little blocks that are building up to make a fairly strong case that she's, her sources are on from within the four walls. And the other thing, of course, was the medical report, which nobody had heard about at this stage. The fact that there was a medical report done, and that was given to Burton but wasn't handed on.
He sat on it.
He sat on it for quite some time. So there's all these quite sort of specific and information that only comes from within the four walls. But there's all these things that are building up, which says that as you point out that where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, and that's it's really easy, and I've seen a fair bit happening on the Big Footy board. It's fairly easy to write off, every attack from the media as being some sort of grand Victorian conspiracy against us. And, and I do think at times like this they are probably sinking the boot in. But Caro's a investigative journalist from a long time, even before she reported on footy, and to dismiss it as hyperbole and rumour, I think is it's a very big misstep by a lot of people, and I think people need to have a think about what is actually happening and what are we seeing through the results, and what are we seeing through the in the player movements, as we said. Something happened in the middle of the year that was bigger than injuries. I watched I watched the side basically walk around their opposition on Traeger Park in the middle of the year. You know, we lost to Fremantle that didn't have a Nat Fyfe and a Sandilands with a fairly decent squad on the park. You know, there was something happened in the middle of the year that made us have a reset and a change. And to the group's, the playing group's credit, they did have a reset and they found their mojo again. But there was 4 or 5 weeks in the middle there where this club, you know, hit rock bottom in terms of playing performance. And I think something around that time is where we're looking at. So, which means it's not just the camp; it's the follow up to the camp. And that's where I think the rotten part is.
Well, the example that Pete gave about Franco, for example, the opportunity to coach at home, etc., and have a 3-year contract, yet he's prepared to walk away, if necessary, from football altogether, just not to be at Adelaide. And I think that is very, very telling, in my opinion.
It's pretty
and
savage,
he was a bloke from a really good cab. You know, premiership player at Port, you know, pretty respected midfield coach at Sydney, you know, gets to Adelaide, you know, after, you know, less than 12 months in the job, wants out and nothing to do with footy anymore. Like that's an indictment on the club.
Yeah, it's savage.
And I'm the optimist.
Yeah, you are the optimist, mate. And, you know, you're right. There's been a lot of people that have just said, move on, trust the club, blah, 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 blah. We'd all love to. But, I mean, the facts are the facts. And the number one fact in all of this is that we were a grand finalist that has sunk to 12th on the ladder the following year. And with some, highlights such as the Traeger Park game and the Hawthorn game, which was, in many respects, the Hawthorn game was more horrifying for me than the Melbourne game, because the Hawthorn game was essentially played in one half of the ground all night. We had no answers and no one appeared to make or want to make an effort to do anything. Look, I think, notwithstanding all the camp talk, I think the impact of the injury management has been underplayed, and I think the camp certainly presents very good tabloid fodder for the media, and the issues around our injuries are probably less sensational. But I think it's worth highlighting the fact that, as we've stated before, we implemented new technology poorly. And as a consequence, we've now made what I think is a very, very key appointment for a couple of reasons. Steve Saunders coming on board. Steve obviously is the one of the main designers of the Kangatech technology. Designed when he was at North. Kangatech's owned by a couple of North directors, Carl Delena, and I always forget the other guy's name. Steve was essentially responsible over the last 12 to 24 months in promoting that product globally, and it has got traction globally. Now, to get Steve on board, together with the fact that we know that they're developing a new interface in order to utilise the software or utilise the technology a little bit better, it says to me a couple of things. First of all, they've acknowledged that they have to spend more money within the football department. And yes, they've let some people go in order to do that, but I think it's a redirection of funds. So they've certainly looked at it from a financial perspective. But secondly, I think bringing Steve on board is also going to have a positive impact on those players that have struggled to stay on the park, because you've got the bloke who made the stuff now at the club. He's also a well-respected proponent of injury management. He's got a fantastic track record at North Melbourne, Sean Higgins being the poster boy of that program. And I think, we've heard some unrest rumours, surrounding a few blokes like Bradley Crouch and a couple of others, and largely because of injury mismanagement. There's talk that part of Mitch's reasons for wanting to go is poor injury management around grand final time last season, or around the finals last season, when he was played in round 23 with a tight hammy when he should have been rested. There's talk about a player at the club may be in dispute because certain contract triggers weren't triggered because of injury. So I think bringing Saunders on, as much as it's got some practical, ramifications, hopefully positive, I think it's also the club saying to the players, look, all right, we acknowledge it, and here's what we're doing to fix it. We're actually bringing in the bloke that built the stuff. So I think of all the appointments that occur or changes in our personnel that occur during the off-season, I think Steve Saunders is the key.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, mate. And
hopefully
hopefully the interface has an iPad that just flashes red and says, "Brett, stop putting him on the treadmill."
The other bit of news around in terms of appointments is that a bit of talk around that Marty Mattner may consider that the move to Adelaide is the way to go for him, and of course he's involved in Sandford finals at the moment, but he, I imagine, would be a good pickup, having been outside of the Crows environment for a good number of years, played in the successful system at Sydney, and of course has been an outstanding coach for the Sturt Football Club. So I think that would be, if that comes to fruition, that would also be a pretty good appointment for 2019.
I think it's very likely. I did hear him interviewed, and he was asked about this, but the way he didn't want to talk about it made it clear to me that there is something in there's some conversations going on. Usually, if there's nothing in it, they make some comment. No, there's nothing there, or something like that. But the way he was talking, I think there's definitely something there. And I think what you said about him, Pete's 100% right. He's been in a good environment when he was with Sydney. He's proven that he can coach when he's been with Sturt, and he'd be a very solid addition to our coaching staff, I think.
So you're a Sturt man. What does he bring?
Well, I'm actually really disappointed in the Adelaide Footy Club for derailing Sturt's premiership campaign, or attempting to. Obviously haven't got their priorities right. But no, look, I mean, the word about Marty is that he's just a really good communicator, and he's a very good thinker when it comes to tactics. He's got Sturt playing a very repeatable style of football, and it holds up under pressure. It didn't hold up under three umpires getting behind the Eagles last week. But anyway, I think, Mackie, you're right what you say. He's got good pedigree. He's got runs on the board. And, we have brought in Franco unsuccessfully this season from another system. Hopefully, they bring Martin Mattner on with a sense of actually using what they're employing him for, which is, I think, probably something that they perhaps didn't do with Josh Franco. If you're going to employ someone, you're employing them because of their strengths. You may as well use their strengths rather than just slot them in and get them to toe the line. So I hope they've learnt in that regard.
And the other thing, you have to be a successful coach, you have to be a very good man manager, and that is apparently one of his real strengths, which you touched on there, Phoenix.
Yeah,
his man management.
Yep. A good mix of being, not one of the lads, but certainly being able to talk on their level, but also commands enough respect that they play for him. So, it's a different kettle of fish being a line coach in an AFL team, but I hope the Crows recognise the strengths that they're employing him for if they do bring him on, and actually utilise those strengths rather than just, stick him in a slot and say, there you go, do your bit. Obviously, Pete, who was the other bloke that was roaming around that's off the mark? There's been no more word on Sumich, has there, with regards to another slot?
No, just that his name's sort of often mentioned in connection with Don Pike, but nothing as strong as what's been put out about Mattner.
Yeah, that seems to be a done deal. And then a couple of whispers about players too. It looks like Lysett might be going to Port Adelaide after a bit of interest from St Kilda. And Polek also in a bit of tug-of-war between the Kangaroos and the Saints as well, seems to be the latest rumours.
Yeah, and a little bit of chatter about Chad Wingard as well, although I suspect that is the that will go down the Hamish Hartlett path of just wanting to give him a kick up the backside, and or some tension on his part with the Port Club, and there'll be some ridiculous demand about his trade value, and he won't go anywhere, and so that will just play out as a little bit of a spat between the two, as Hartlett's did, I suspect.
Isn't he asking for $1 million a year over 5 years?
Yeah.
Well,
that's going to go nowhere.
Joust and sticks. Tell him straight.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
We heard Fiend was... Sorry, go on.
I was just going to finish that one off by saying it's interesting that Chad's manager would come out with that number when Port have already said that they can't match for Polek. So I don't know what they think they're doing, unless they think that perhaps there might be a little bit more money in the kitty with Pollock going, and they want their share of it. But doesn't Chad get free agency next year?
2020, I think.
The end of next year.
Yeah. I don't think Port will shift on that, and I don't think anyone will pay $1 million a year for him either.
No, I think his manager just floated it out there to see what might float back in the direction towards Chad. And I don't know whether he would really expect to get $1 million, but he might be seen to be can fish out 800 or 900 or something like that. I mean, you wouldn't say it just for no reason at all.
No, you wouldn't think. Sorry, Pete, go on. What was the next one?
Well, you and I both had a bit of a tip-off through the week about Peter Wright from the Gold Coast, apparently in the sights of the Adelaide Football Club. So that I don't know how much weight that one's got. Certainly not from where we got the Mitch McGovern stuff, but you never know.
No.
So that's potentially someone we're talking to. But as I say, we'll take that one without the weight that we give the other one. So that's interesting. Mitch McGovern, that's the big, I guess, talking point from a trade perspective for us.
What's happening with him?
Yeah, interesting. He was at the Best and Fairest on Friday night and seemed to be, from all reports, pretty happy, and was no dramas with all of the players. So that's good. That's a good result. No need for the animosity. So I think that there's a strong chance that we will get a pretty decent draft pick from him. There's a little bit of talk around about that Gold Coast might be ready to throw something at him as well.
Yeah,
that could raise the stakes a little bit. So I'd imagine there'll be a few offers that will come in, and we can sit back and work out what's the best.
Cam Ellis-Yeoman, Pete.
No, there wasn't. I think Treaders dropped a rumour that he was Sydney were looking at Cam Ellis-Yeoman, and they have looked at him before. This wouldn't be the first nibble they've had at Cam, and I think he'd suit their style, to be honest.
He certainly would, because at the moment they're this season they were really down to only two genuine midfielders. Hannaberry had a very, very poor season. Kieran Jackie, he came good at the couple of games towards the end, but he was a non-entity as well. And, it's really just Parker and Kennedy busting their guts every week. So a midfielder would be very handy for them.
Yeah, although another one, they don't have a lot of outside pace, really, do they?
They don't have any. So
I don't know where Ellis-Yeoman fits in there. I still think that Cam Willing, he might end up being a bit of, not steak knives, he's better than that, but you know what I mean, a bit of a sweetener in a McGovern trade to get us up the draft order a bit. I think he'd if he wanted to go to Gold Coast and that's where Mitch was heading, I think he'd be a good fit up there. And Carlton will take anyone at the moment if that's where Mitch ends up going as well. So I don't think it would be a bad career move for Cam actually to leave Adelaide. He's been in the system for a long time. He's had one or two ups and downs. He's probably being overtaken by Hugh Greenwood. Certainly not on stats, but just on general, vibe around the place. But I think he would be a more than serviceable inside mid, very workmanlike inside mid for a number of clubs. And I think he could do a lot worse than to explore his options.
Well, on top of that, there's the Gooch as well. We've got plenty of inside mids, and we need outside mids as well. And that's where I think the Gooch might well play a bit of midfield next year.
Yeah,
I certainly hope so.
Very smooth.
He was a very, very impressive last few games for the Gooch. He was very impressive, I thought.
Yep,
Very
finished off strong. Any other news before we move on and maybe talk about the finals coming up this week, even though we're not part of it?
Just quickly, I had a look at the TV on Sunday to see one Jay Lukosius have a kick of the leather on Sunday. I thought he was pretty impressive. I don't know what you guys thought, but I thought this is the guy that's going to cause all of the flurry come trade week and draft week. So it was interesting to have a look at him play. I've seen him a few times, and I thought he had a quiet second half, but his first half was very impressive.
What did you think were his strong points, Pete?
Oh, I think that because I think that we've all got the idea that he's some sort of big power key forward, and he's just not. He presents to me very much as a utility type player, his capacity, his running capacity, his vision, his ability to involve himself in the play. I think that he projects to me almost as a James Hird type player. I can't remember how tall James Hird was, and off the top of my head, I don't have the height statistics. But James Hird was a player that just put himself where he needed to be, and he could play on the ball. He could play a key position forward, or he could play key back. He was that kind of player, and I just see Lukosius as being so much more than a guerrilla key forward. I think that there is sort of some thought around that maybe that's what he is, but I don't think he is. I think he's going to be much more than that.
Well, where would you see him once he'd been in the system 3 or 4 years? Where would you see him playing?
Well, I think you'd call him a utility, Macca. You'd call him a utility that, depending on where you needed him to play. I mean, where did James Hird play?
Yeah, but that's a fair comment.
Different game though now.
Do you know
Pete.
what I mean?
Different game now. Versatility is really important, but the game is all about roles, and I still see Luko as a powerful lead up forward who can get up the ground a bit. But you're right. You could swing him down back, no problems at all. But I still see him. I still think he's a forward.
And do you think he's going to be as good as they say he's going to be?
You asking me? Oh, it's
Anybody.
really hard. It's hard. Well, it's obviously it's hard because you just never you never really quite know how they're going to turn out. But everything that you see, you would have to say that he's got a long AFL career in front of him.
Oh, well, I don't doubt that. But the point is that Adelaide prepared almost sell the farm to get him.
The difference is, Macca, is that you can look at him and he can watch him playing amongst men. And a lot of the, if you look at picks like Shackey and McCartan and those kind of guys, they were playing under 18s.
Yeah, the last bloke to present like Lukosius, in my opinion, from South Australia was Matthew Pavlich, in terms of his ability to just step into the big league as if he's already played 100 games. And I don't think Jack Lukosius is physically as developed as Pav was at the same age. And that's why I think that once he fills out, reaches his full height, I just see him as an aggressive, hard-leading, dynamic forward who you could use a little bit like Lance Franklin and get him up the ground and get him involved in the play, sometimes out of position. But ultimately, he's your weapon up forward.
Well, actually, that's not a bad comparison either, Fee, now that I come to think of it, because Franklin's not a massive pack mark, guerrilla type forward. He's that really mobile, agile forward up and down the ground. So that's probably not a bad comparison in the modern game.
Mm. And there's obviously been comparisons with Revolt too, and I think that's a lot to do with Jack's apparent running capacity. Look, you're right. Number one, Macca is a big call, but if not him, then who?
Oh, no, I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I'm just querying people who know more about it than I do, how they rate him. That's all.
Yeah. No, there's Walsh is obviously in the mix, and he seems like a ready-made midfielder. You got those big lads, the brothers that play at
King brothers.
What are they, Sandringham, I think. And then you've got a whole bunch of midfielders really. So I think just for his point of difference, I think Jack offers something that none of those other players do. And I think I've certainly seen enough of him to think that if he's not a once-in-a-generation player, then he's certainly going to be a very handy 200-plus game player for a club.
Well, if he was anything like Pavlich, who won an All-Australian back and won an All-Australian up forward, so if he could go backwards and forwards and be like that, well, I'd be very, very happy.
Well, Pav's the same as Luca. Even that performance by Henley to beat, who was it, PAC in the school knockout. They just owned that. Him and his Henley mates just owned that game. He wasn't dominant by any stretch, but the combination of those boys running around, it was a powerful display just from the highlights that I saw. Pavlich was much the same when he was running around for Sacred Heart. They just give him the ball, and he'd just win games for them. He was freakish. So, I guess that's where I make the comparison from there. And my only query on us going for Lukosius is on need. Just given that we do have some good forwards and that we are crying out for some speed. But if you're picking on talent alone, I don't think you go past him.
Well, we do have a need for pace. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I tend to think along your lines normally, Phoenix, but I just feel that Lukosius might be just that talented that you just pick him. Like, do you want to be sitting there in 3 or 4 years' time going, "Oh, we went with the clever pick and got somebody else, but we could have got Luco and he's the greatest forward since sliced bread."
Well, the good thing is we might have 2 or 3 picks in the first round, so
Yeah.
If we get one of the 2 right, then it's not bad, and hopefully the other one's Rankin, of course, because when you're talking about pace, that's the one. There's some talk around that he might be tanking a few discussions with other clubs. Of course, that can't be true because you can't tamper the draft, but he might be doing a bit of a Cyril, maybe.
Oh, he said on TV today he'd be happy to go to any club.
Yeah,
so,
that's what he's saying publicly.
He may be saying something different to them, but he's certainly covering his backside in that area.
Yeah. Anyway, interesting times coming up. But of course, this week we've got the first week of the AFL finals, and let's, even though we're not in it, why don't we just have a bit of a chat about that, shall we? It actually represents a bit of a interesting first round of the finals. There's some very interesting games on this week.
Yeah, well, the AFL's got to decide on Thursday night who they gift the game to, whether the umpires are going to rig it for Hawthorn or rig it for Richmond, don't they? Very tough in selection meeting on Wednesday afternoon.
Look, I think this could represent the beginning of Richmond's demise in their quest for back-to-back. I've said it before. I think of all the matchups, I think this is the one they wouldn't have wanted in the first week.
Yeah, and apparently the first time they've ever played Hawthorn in the finals or something.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I think that they'll win. I think the Tigers will win comfortably. I think that we're all just hanging around waiting for them to get their second flag, and they've just been so dominant at the MCG. I don't know they've had close games there, but generally speaking, and I know what you're saying, Vena, that the that keep hold of the football style that Hawthorn will want to play will cut it straight against the way that Richmond want to play, which is to keep the ball moving at all costs. So conflict of game styles there, but I just can't see Richmond losing at the G.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think common sense says that based on the season, Richmond should win, but the only thing against that, of course, is based on common sense. Adelaide should have won the grand final last year, but so anything can happen on the day. I'm picking Richmond, but it wouldn't surprise me if Hawthorn, with the most astute coach in the competition in Alistair Clarkson, did pull up off an upset, but going on form, it's Richmond.
Yeah, I think you touched on the big factor for me, Macca, and that's Alistair Clarkson. Richmond certainly have the most healthy list. You look at their injury list and there's just no one of any real note on there apart from probably Kane Lambert, I guess. Whereas Hawthorn have got a couple coming good. James Sicily should be right. And James Frawley, if they decide to play him down back, I don't know whether they will. Birchall's a chance. But Richmond certainly are going to have a full squad on deck. But Clarkson is a wild card for mine for Hawthorn for this entire final series. And whilst I don't think that they're certainly not my tip to win, I think his influence can get Hawthorn into the preliminary final round, in my opinion.
So you're obviously saying they're going to win this game.
Yeah, I do. I think they're going to beat Richmond on Thursday night. For some reason, I'm not as impressed. I know that Richmond have had great results this year and they've streeted the field at MCG and all the rest of it. But I don't know. I've just got this nagging feeling that Hawthorn are going to do a number of them on them this week.
Hope you're right.
Of course, we've got the D's and the Cats on Friday night. That's also going to be an interesting one because you've got the Cats with a very strong midfield coming up against Melbourne, who's probably also both, perhaps, arguably the best midfield in the comp. So definitely a battle of the midfields and to see who can perhaps eke out a winning score between the two teams.
I think Melbourne will win this one comfortably. I think Geelong have had a couple of training runs in the last couple of rounds, and I don't think that was a particularly good thing coming into the finals. And I think Melbourne, conversely, had 2 or 3 really quiet and have got them.
What's happening to you, Pete? You're dropping out there.
So it's hard to tilt.
No, Pete seems to be in and out.
Yeah. Well,
Pete, if you can hear us, your microphone's dropping in and out, mate. You might have a loose cord
better?
there.
I think I'm comfortably.
Yeah, probably can't stream Orange is the New Black while you're doing this, mate.
Donkey, what do you reckon?
Look, I think this is Melbourne's games to lose. They are so far ahead of the competition, they can't lose from here, and I'm just hoping I put enough of the mockers on them so they do.
Yeah,
I think they've got a very, very good team. If they've got any weaknesses at all, it is down back. They've got a very good forward line. They've got a very, very strong midfield. They've got a champion ruckman. So, having said all that, I think Geelong are going to win the game. And okay. I think that Dangerfield hit top form last week, just absolutely top form. I thought he played an unbelievable game, and I think that he will have a very big game, and I think that Geelong will. I think Nurs will get Melbourne a little bit, and I think that I'm picking Geelong.
What do you reckon, Pete? Sorry.
Yeah, I said Melbourne, mate.
Yeah, I know, but we couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry, Melbourne comfortably.
Yeah, Melbourne for me. I think they're probably more impressive across more parts of the ground, I think, than Geelong. And they'll get up for mine. And then on Saturday, 2 very interesting games. Obviously, we've got the Sydney Derby, Sydney versus the Giants. The Giants limping into the finals, but obviously probably got the class edge over Sydney. but Sydney have a couple of weapons, and Buddy Franklin running on top of the ground as well.
Well,
I reckon this is the hardest. This is the hardest one to pick for the weekend, I reckon.
It is hard. It is hard because common sense says, Sydney got the home ground advantage, etc., which is not a home ground advantage, having lost 6 games here this year. So I think that if it was played on a bigger ground, I would have to go Sydney, but I think that the Giants will win it on the smaller ground.
Donk?
I reckon, I agree that it's a really tough one to call, probably the toughest. I think they're both playing sporadic footy. I think that Sydney have probably got it together in the last few weeks more so than GWS, so I'm going to tip GWS.
Yeah, a bit of a question mark over Franklin with his groin, and a couple of others. Luke Parker also carrying a bit of a groin. Obviously, GWS have got their well-documented injury woes, although they're getting quite a few back, or quite a few available this week. Griffin, Green, Delidio, DeBoer. So they might actually be a little bit fitter, GWS, and I think they'll get over Sydney this week.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with the Swannies on this one. I just reckon they'll just find a way.
Yeah, and the last one, of course, over in Perth is West Coast versus Collingwood. Collingwood, your babies. Pete, what do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I'm going to stick with them. I think that they've been in the top, 2 or 3 teams all year, and they've been a really exciting team to watch. They played a really, really good brand of football, and they've always traditionally travelled pretty well. For a team that doesn't travel a lot, Collingwood generally travel pretty well, and I think that they'll get it done over there.
Macca?
Yeah, hot pies.
Oh,
Sorry.
Donkey, go on.
I was going to say, hot pies. They, I think that West Coast are just lacking too much cattle. And even if Kenny comes back, he's going to be a bit rusty. So without Gaff, without Nick Nat, and against a pretty steaming opposition, I think the Pies have got the goods.
Yeah, I'm going the other way. I think the home ground advantage is an advantage, and Peter is right. Collingwood are good travellers, but I still think it's a big advantage to be home and have 60,000 people screaming for you and supporting them, and perhaps influencing the umpire with a bit of luck. So in a very, very close one, and wouldn't be surprised if I'm wrong, but I'm going West Coast.
Yeah, I'm going West Coast too. I think Kennedy will be all right when he comes back, and I think just his presence is going to trouble Collingwood. Collingwood got I guess a bit of a cloud hanging over the side with the terrible tragedy around Travis Varco, and a couple of injury queries as well. I think at the end of the day, I think it'll be just a bit of a bridge too far for Collingwood, but I think it'll be the closest game of the weekend actually. But I think West Coast just sneak over the line. So that would mean certainly from my tips, if Hawthorn get up, then that throws Richmond onto the other side of the draw. Most people think that Geelong are going to go out. Sydney and Giants could go either way, and it's apart from Richmond, it's quite a wide open final series, and if the Hawks do get up in the first week, then I think it throws the premiership race wide open.
Oh, well, definitely, because Richmond have to travel then. If West Coast win,
yeah,
that means in order to get to the grand final, Richmond have to go to Perth, and we know that they don't travel.
Yeah, exactly. It brings them back to the
Guinness,
pack,
the Guinness of AFL football.
Very good point, Pete. That's a very good point. And Richmond rely on the fact of winning at the G, and should they lose, I'd say that's the end of them.
Yeah, and welcome to American Crow on the chat. And I just want to know if he reckons the Browns are going to do any good this season. Obviously, the Steelers are going to be up and about again. They've had a very good off-season, a very good pre-season, so beware the mighty black and gold. But American Crow, hopefully for you, the Browns can have a half-decent season. Look, we've got no competitions this week.
No, do you want me to go through round one again? Or?
No, not really. Now, Macca, I hope you're fired up because you're coming in early tonight.
I thought,
I'm a scruffy old man. That's what I am. And I really don't care who knows it. I don't vote politicians.
well, no, very light on, mate. Very light on. But one sweet that I am happy to talk about is the AFL with their integrity unit having a look at our camp. And the once they've had the once over on it, it'll either be passed as being acceptable and the media will hopefully shut up, or if it's wasn't up to par and there were things that should come out, then hopefully that'll come out as well. But it's at the moment we just sit there like bloody idiots allowing people to pot us. And the interesting thing is that this medical report, the AFL didn't know about it either when they had an initial look at it with their integrity unit. But so that's just the sweet. From the smack point of view,
was that a sweet or a smack or a comment that was 45 minutes too late, or what was it?
Well, I had that. I had my sweet as the fact that at least it was going to be investigated by impartial people rather than that was my point.
Very good. You got any non-Adelaide Football Club sweets or smacker?
Non-Adelaide Footy Club?
Yeah, because we spent the whole night talking about the stupid Crows.
Mate, my trouble is I've had trouble reading the paper.
CrowCast.
So I'm a little. I told you I'm going to be light on.
Yeah, no, it's all
What
good.
do you think of Burton?
Yeah.
Well, he's a dickhead. We all know that. And
Drink.
I shouldn't have to tell people he is a dickhead, and he shouldn't be there.
Hey,
Couldn't agree
Macca.
more, Macca.
Macca. There's
Yeah.
this other. I don't know if you know. There's this other dickhead too that keeps ringing up the radio station and always pinching all the vouchers.
Yeah, he won one today. 50.
He won
Another one
today, didn't he?
Yes. Oh, it's all about timing, mate. And
I'd just also like to point out that Macca won his Dream Team competition, and how much did you bring home, Mac?
$1,600.
Oh,
Jesus.
If you don't mind.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
well,
that's two $50 vouchers for the. I might just explain to the audience why I did get that voucher.
all right, do that.
They said to be a little bit bold with what you would do if you were the list manager in terms of players that you would either delist or trade or whatever, mainly trade. And well, obviously, we've got what's his name that wanted to nick off to us, and we were going to trade him out to Carlton or to Gold Coast, whoever we can get the best deal on. But on top of that, I would trade Hardigan. I think he's surplus to What?
What, Macca? No one heard anything.
No, he's surplus to requirements. We've got Keith there. We've got a lot of guys in the back line to do a lot better than Hardigan when they're playing. And also, I think I would also put young Kelly up for trade. And because I think in terms of skills, I think
what's this got to do with anything?
I'm telling you why I won the voucher, mate. That's what I'm telling you. And I also,
I was just having a shit suit. I didn't need a whole bloody diatribe on how you won the bloody
If people
thing.
are interested in what Macca had to say on 5AA, they've probably got their podcast up on 5AA.com.au now. Just go and listen to the bloody podcast, and you'll hear some one-eyed bloke talking about trades.
The last one was CEY. No, I told you I'm light on because I haven't been reading the papers, mate.
No, it's all
How
good.
good was your report card in year 5, Macca? Tell us.
Well, I was top of the class, mate.
No doubt.
All right, let's tidy this up. Obviously, it's a shorter Tuesday Night Live tonight because we don't have any more Crows games to talk about, and we don't have any more competitions to talk about.
Well, I can talk about the other voucher that I won, mate.
Get stuffed.
Did you get 2?
We do have one more competition that I inconveniently forgot about that that I threw up. The ladder predictor competition that I chucked in. So I haven't forgotten about it. and I'll find those screenshots that I took, and we'll sort that out next week. Just before we go, for those that might have ventured onto our website, you'll notice that there's been some upgrades. There's going to be some continued upgrades over the off-season on our website. Probably the biggest upgrade at the moment is you can now sign up. Signing up will allow you to write your own articles. So if you want to ramble on and put your point of view across, there's a fan article section there, so it doesn't cost anything to join the website or anything like that. We're not going to use your information, give it to Fagan so that he's got more on his database. It's purely a way for us to give you guys an opportunity to put some words down and get it out. And obviously we've got our Patreon site up and running now, and thanks to a couple of people who have already joined the Patreon site. Thank you very much, and also thank you to those who have donated through our PayPal donation button over the course of the season. We'll talk more about what's going to happen in 2019 as we go along in the next couple of casts. But if you do want to check out some of the offerings for next season, go to our Patreon account, patreon.com/AFL CrowCast. And if you have a look at the different tiers there, it'll give you an idea of what's in store, including, Pete, 2 game day calls next season. I've just put it on there.
That's going to be a very, very exciting addition to the cast, and I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah, Ryan HG style is the go. I think we're going to sink a few pints and play a bit of pool and have the footy on and just ramble on for a couple of games and just see how it goes. So so head on over to our Patreon account, check out our AFLCrowcast.com website. We chuck articles up there and all different types of things. Of course, you can catch our podcast there in video or audio format on demand, as you can on just about every podcatching software known to man. Sorry to those that had to endure a bit of a delay on our iTunes feed last week. I don't know what went on there, but we got all that fixed up.
Sorry, mate, I'm just loving some of the comments coming about what our commentary is going to be like. Following that on Spreaker, it is going to be funny. It's going to be funny.
Look, we're going to have to mark it explicit. We're going to have to pick a couple of games that might go 50-50. I really do think, Pete, that we need to pick the Hawthorn game just so that we can just go crazy at the umpires. And
Jack Gunston.
And Jack Gunston, yeah. I really don't know how it's going to go, but it's going to be fun anyway. And if you don't try, you don't know. It could be a hit. Anyway, look, thanks to everyone who's joined us on the Spreaker chat again tonight. It's been a slow night, obviously, Crows-wise, but I hope you've been entertained. Thanks for those who have joined us on Facebook. And obviously no rep show for the rest of the season, but we will join you again on Tuesday night next week for another edition of Tuesday Night Live. Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers, boys.
Yep. Good night, all.